There are two kinds of people in quiet neighborhoods: those who mind their business, and those who believe it's their responsibility to watch everyone else. They notice who comes home late. They notice which lights stay on too long. They notice things that were never meant to be noticed. Margaret Holloway was the second kind. She believed she was protecting her neighborhood. But when she accused the man across the street of suspicious activity, she had no idea she was about to expose a crime she committed herself. This is a story about guilt, about obsession, and about what happens when the truth finally watches back. There are neighborhoods that feel safe because nothing ever happens there. And then there are neighborhoods that feel safe because the people living there are convinced they would notice if something did. Cedar Ridge Lane was one of those places. Tree-lined, quiet, predictable, and watched. Margaret Holloway had lived on Cedar Ridge Lane for 14 years, 7 months, and 3 days. She knew this because she kept records. Not official ones, personal ones. Mental tallies of routines, habits, and changes. Margaret noticed things. She noticed when Mrs. Langley at number 12 stopped watering her plants every morning at exactly 7:10 a.m. She noticed when the Miller boy came home 10 minutes later than usual on Wednesdays. She noticed when unfamiliar cars lingered too long at the curb. Margaret told herself this made her responsible. Vigilant. Margaret told herself this made her responsible. Vigilant. A protector of her community. Her husband called it overthinking. Margaret called it awareness. So when the man across the street moved in, Margaret noticed him immediately. His name, according to the mailbox, was Elliot Kane. Late 30s. Maybe 40. Quiet. No family. No visitors. No decorations. No pets. He moved in 6 months earlier, into the house that had belonged to old Mr. Pritchard before his sudden death. The sale had been fast. Too fast. Margaret remembered watching Elliot unload his car that first day. Boxes stacked neatly. Nothing labeled. No movers. Just him. Calm. Methodical. Precise. He hadn't waved. Margaret waved anyway. He nodded once, brief and unreadable. That was the first thing that bothered her. The second thing was his schedule. Elliot didn't live like normal people. Some nights, his lights were on until dawn. Other nights, the house was completely dark, yet Margaret swore she saw movement. He came and went at odd hours, sometimes leaving just after midnight, sometimes returning before sunrise. And he always carried something with him. A bag. A folder. Or most often, a notebook. Margaret watched him write in it from her living room window. She told herself it was harmless curiosity. But curiosity has a way of becoming obsession when left unchecked. It started small. Margaret began timing his departures. 12:41 a.m. 2:17 a.m. 3:03 a.m. She wrote the times down on a yellow legal pad she kept hidden in a kitchen drawer. She noticed he rarely used his front door anymore. Instead, he slipped out through the garage, careful, quiet, deliberate. She noticed the faint glow of light from his garage late at night. And one night, just after 1 a.m., she noticed something else. Elliot Kane was digging. Margaret had woken to use the bathroom when she glanced out the window, more out of habit than intention. That was when she saw him. In the backyard. With a shovel. Her breath caught in her throat. He wasn't digging wildly or frantically. He moved slowly, carefully, as if measuring depth and placement. As if he knew exactly where to dig. Margaret stood frozen, heart pounding. He stopped suddenly. Looked around. Margaret ducked back instinctively, heart racing, convinced he'd seen her. But when she peeked again, Elliot was gone. The hole remained. Margaret didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, she walked past his house under the pretense of taking out her trash. She tried to glimpse the backyard. Nothing. The ground looked untouched. Too untouched. Margaret's unease hardened into suspicion. By the end of the week, she made her first call. "I don't want to waste anyone's time," she told the dispatcher, voice calm but tight, "but I believe there may be suspicious activity happening at a residence across from mine." The officer asked routine questions. "Weapons? Drugs? Threats?" "No," Margaret admitted. "But he's hiding something." The line went quiet for a moment. Then the officer said, "We'll do a drive-by." That evening, a patrol car rolled slowly down Cedar Ridge Lane. Margaret watched Elliot watch the patrol car. He didn't panic. He didn't retreat. He simply closed his notebook and went inside. That disturbed her more than fear ever could. Days passed. Then weeks. Margaret noticed Elliot looking at her house more often. Not staring. Observing. Like he was waiting for something. The second call came after she saw him in the woods. Behind Cedar Ridge Lane was a thin stretch of trees bordering an old drainage easement, abandoned, forgotten, rarely used. At 1:42 a.m., Margaret saw Elliot cross into the trees carrying a shovel and a heavy black bag. This time, she didn't hesitate. She called 911. "There's a man behind my house," she whispered. "He's digging. I think he's burying something." Police arrived within minutes. Red and blue lights shattered the darkness. Margaret watched from behind her curtains as officers approached the woods. They found Elliot standing calmly beside a shallow pit, shovel resting upright in the dirt. He raised his hand slowly. "I was expecting you," he said. Margaret frowned. That wasn't right. The officer asked him what he was doing. Elliot gestured to his notebook. "Investigating," he said. The officer flipped through the pages. Margaret couldn't see the writing, but she saw the officer's expression change. "What is this?" the officer asked. "Patterns," Elliot replied. "Timelines. Statements that don't line up." "Statements about what?" Elliot's gaze drifted, not to the police, but toward Margaret's house. "About a woman who reported a theft," he said calmly, but whose story never matched the evidence. Margaret's blood ran cold. The officer closed the notebook. They escorted Elliot home, not in handcuffs, but not exactly free. That night, Margaret sat in her dark living room, convinced she'd made a mistake. Then the package arrived. No return address. Inside was a photograph. Her living room. Her coffee table. And beneath a loose floorboard, the silver bracelet she had reported stolen 3 years earlier. On the back, 3 words written neatly in ink: "You buried it wrong." Margaret screamed. And across the street, Elliot Kane wrote her name in his notebook. Margaret Holloway did not call the police. She couldn't. She sat on the floor clutching the photograph, every lie she'd ever told pressing down on her chest like a weight she could no longer lift. The bracelet had been easy. A fake theft. An insurance claim. A harmless lie. But the bracelet was never the crime. It was only the beginning. Margaret watched Elliot's house all night. At dawn, when he finally left, she followed him. He drove to the edge of town, to a municipal storage building long since abandoned. He unlocked a side door and disappeared inside. Margaret waited. Then she followed. Inside, the walls were covered with evidence. Photos. Maps. Reports. At the center was a familiar face. Linda Holloway. Her sister. Missing. Presumed runaway. Elliot stood behind her. "She didn't leave," he said quietly. Margaret collapsed. "You were supposed to disappear," she sobbed.
Elliot's voice was steady. "I was 12 when my mother vanished," he said. "Linda Holloway was my mother." Margaret screamed as police sirens approached. Elliot had already called them. The excavation revealed remains in the woods behind Cedar Ridge Lane. The truth finally surfaced. Margaret was arrested. The case made headlines. Elliot Kane attended the reburial alone. Justice didn't feel loud. It felt quiet. And on Cedar Ridge Lane, no one watched anymore. Margaret Holloway spent years watching others, never realizing the most dangerous thing she was hiding was herself. Because secrets don't stay buried forever. They wait, and one day, they make sure they're seen.